So understanding that central limit theorem, that's where we talked about descriptive statistics helping us as a way to identify metrics in our process, right? Now, a few things that we should know up to this point. We should understand how to calculate what is our probability, right? Which is just going to be our p value is going to be our outcome, favorite outcome over total. Understanding that, right? So if I am rolling a dice and I say that dice has a probability of 1 out of 6 of landing on my side, right? We can also refer to that as 16.67%. Understanding that if I have that same dice and I have a probability of 1 out of 6, what would be my defect percentage? Well, it would essentially be that 1 or 5 out of 6, right? Because that's going to be what's remaining left over. Now, when you do that math, what do you guys get? It should be whatever 1 minus 7. So if we had a defect percentage and we said that dice that I'm rolling, if I'm rolling that dice, I have a probability or a favorable outcome of 1 out of 6. I have a probability or defect percentage of 5 out of 6, or we can do the fraction there. And what do we get when we turn that into a probability? What do we get when we turn 5 out of 6 into a probability? 83.33%. So, that's the same thing as saying, okay, if I have a if I flip a coin 50% or 0.5, my yield or defect percentage is going to be the same way, going to be 50%. So, as we're looking at that, understanding those basic mathematical components going into this. Now, tonight's session, we're going to evolve a little bit more off the statistics that we learned in the last session, but it's going to help us understand this from a practicality standpoint. And I'm going to pull that up for you guys. In the last session, we talked about this case. Let me clear that out. Where we were helping Mr. Pepperoni out with our pizza business case, right? And we identified several different things in here, right? We identified the number of pizzas that were sold, the revenue, and we identified what was the main problem. We identified this as our main problem of being late deliveries. And we did that because once we created a Pareto chart, this then became evident in our data collection procedures. Now, as we're looking at this, our focus becomes more driven, and we start focusing on things that revolve around late delivery. And we'll kind of dive into that analysis as we go through tonight as well. But we have our Pareto chart and established that as a metric for understanding our data, right? And if I was to look at this and I said, okay, um, how am I going to improve these metrics? Well, that's where we can showcase and maybe recording their baseline performance. What is their operation flow, right? This is where we talk about value stream mapping. I think you guys have gotten through that video, process mapping, correct? Give me a thumbs up if you guys did. Okay. So as we look at it, we can use that operation flow to build our process. Now, as we're looking at this chart of our delivery times, right? We established this as a way to um, document and measure our baseline performance. From there, we dove into understanding what Z scores were and how that leads us to our baseline data. And as you can start to see, we have something called the empirical rule, which I called as a rule of thumb in the videos, but essentially 68% of our data is within that one standard deviation range, right? Would anybody argue against that? That most of our collection of data is within that range. And you have some outliers here, but a big collection of our data clusters around the average. And that's what the central limit theorem is stating. From there, we looked at operation efficiency, right? We started to understand our z-score information. As we built this chart, right, we had our x value, we had our mu, we had our sigma value, and from that information, we could understand what the performance is. Now that we know how to utilize Excel to look up our probability, we can now kind of forward ourselves into more advanced topics of statistics, right? The whole point of this is showing where your baseline is and how to improve. One of the improvement points that I love to talk about is something called a T-test, right? A T-test is essentially a collection. Um, if you have two data groups, right? It's a statistical test to compare the means of those two data groups. For example, if I had, I'll come back to that slide, but I wanted to go over this one. A T-test, you could see if there is a statistical difference in these two tests, right? The pink being the pre-test, which would have, like, if I gave you guys an exam at the beginning of class and I said, okay, I want you to take this test. And then at the end of class, I want you, or like the end of the semester, or end of term, take a post test. Well, we can see using t-test, is there a statistical difference in the average of the data set? Now, I don't try to make this super confusing. I can show you a one-tailed test and how we can look at it. I'll go into that just a little bit deeper. But we can use a t-test And the most practical sense where I've used a t-test is when I start looking at operation flow from um that pre-test level to now that post level of the process. If we implemented any type of changes, excuse me, we can see that from a statistical methodology. Now, t-test is typically used when you have less than 30 data points. Um, I say typically because we'll typically use t-test if we have less than 30 data points as a good reference or thumb if we've made a statistical impact in a process. Now, you have a one sample t-test, which is the formula up above. This is where I'm gonna use our formulas tonight. I'm not gonna go into this one, but you'll have videos on this second one on here. But just so we can understand the comparative nature of a process. There's a good video in there where it talks about t-test. And the guy's going through and recording the two types, and he goes into that pre-post test example, which helps understand t-test a little bit better. But this is the formula I want us to utilize tonight, right? We're going to use this value of t equals x mu observation. You can just put mu though, divided by s and the square root of n. N represents your sample size of data. The S represents that sample standard deviation. And the population mean is more of that hypothesized. I'll go into that a little bit more, understanding that from a t-test level. And your X bar, that's always going to be the sample mean. Now remember, a t-test lets you know if there is a statistical difference in processes, right? We can use a t-test 2 example. I don't use it in handwritten form, but in Excel, I use the t-test to understand the two balances of data. So as we write this out, this is going to represent, we still have Z here, but now in our Excel formula, I'm going to show us this. We're going to calculate it as T equals X bar minus mu divided by S square root of N. So therefore, if my N is going to be the collection of data that I'm comparing, right? Now, to do a t-test properly, I want you to focus on inputting the formula into Excel and building it out, because it's going to help you tremendously when we go through tonight's activities. So I want to build this with you. So if you guys wouldn't mind, open back up your pizza business case that we have, and we'll call this our t-test. And we can call it a one tail. Shit, I can't remember this. Yeah, there it is. There it is. Right. And so we build the formula out. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to build it out. I'm going to build it as X bar mu S. What did S represent again? Our standard deviation of a sample. So sigma level or sigma value. And N. Now, building this, thank you, Marianne. Building this, the example here, we can build it and just make sure as you're doing it to build it with the parentheses around the box. Square root and then of n. Before you do the square root of n, I almost messed up there. Just make sure to put parentheses around it. Boop. So I want you guys to take a couple minutes and make sure you have this built. X bar minus mu, close the parentheses, divided by, open the parentheses, the standard deviation of a sample divided by the square root of n. Because I want to close out the parentheses around square root, so you guys have that right. So I build it. And I just rather you guys have that because that's going to help you, especially if you're trying to do a one-tailed test. Now, I really I don't utilize this method. I usually use if I have two sets of data, I'll do a t-test off of that, and I can show an example here shortly of that. But this is the formula I want us to use for t-test in this session and for these examples that I'm going to go into tonight. If you struggle with this portion of it, that's okay. You can handwrite it, do the formulas, handwrite them, and then come back to them in a way that you can watch the video, and this will be uploaded for you guys to watch over the weekend as well. So x bar minus mu divided by the sigma value divided by the square root of n. So if we look at Cool Dudes Pizza, right? Our goal is to come in and talk about several different things, right? And we have come in, we've understood value stream mapping, right? How to map our process and do what the cycle time methods are, right? We can look at a generation of metrics in regards to the next batch of pizzas that we do. And so going into T-Test, I want to do a little bit of a refresher and remind us of a few different things. Number one, we have our confidence interval. A specific confidence level is a measure of reliability that the interval contains the true population parameters. So if I look at it from a t-test standpoint, I have the ability to look at it and say, okay, um, if I am at these metrics right here and these values, um, it is cutting into the threshold. So therefore, I would reject or fail to reject the analysis, right? When I look at a confidence interval, just keep in mind that there's two sets of values, and one could be because we have our negative value over here, and the right value over here is going to be positive. But a confidence level is everything that's inside of this area, that 95%. Now, in statistical studies, we try to be at least 95% sure of our data. Then you have the critical values. These variables or values become the mark for to reject it. If it's outside of that 95%, we're going to have our 5% here and 5% here. You can also look at it as this too. However, we're going to stick with simple numbers here because this does represent the margin of error. And so I do put it as 0.05% on each side. So as you look at that 0.5, right, that's the margin of error. That 95% says that I have a 5% margin of error on this side, and then it would be 100% of my data. And then I have this one tail test over to the left that tells me if I have 5% over here, that would also be 100% of my data. When you start referencing in regards to time, it'll make a little bit more sense. And this is why the case study revolves around that variable. So just know the confidence interval is going to be the range most likely to contain the value, right? And, I always try to say, okay, this is going to be for the most part 95%. In any industry you work with, I mean, like, I don't want to say that 100% because there's certain industries that would have a higher threshold, and that would be like pharmaceuticals, aircraft manufacturers, um, any type of like hospital type environment usually has a higher type of confidence interval, right? And we remember that confidence interval um from the field goal video I had, right? It's the same principle here, right? If we make it in there 95% sure, we're going to be likely we hit the mark. So you find that confidence interval and you can understand we understood how we could use the z-score value to look up the probability, and we could use the probability to find then the z-score. We can call it a t-test here or t-score too, um, but the purpose of this is so we can reject the analysis, right? So the p-value is the probability of the null hypothesis and it being in the confidence interval. Now, when we look at a business case, we have our variable here. Hey guys, come on in. It's 20 minutes or it's free, pickup only, right? This does a number of things for our business. It bogs our process down, right? Because we're getting an influx of calls. And it already sets ourselves up for failure because in our case study, it said 30 minutes or it's free. So as we look at this, we can say, okay, pick up only. Well, one guy comes in and he's a little bit on edge and he says, guys, I've been waiting 19 and a half minutes. So we have to measure our performance level. So what gets measured gets managed. So we need to find a collection of data and see how that compares. So we carefully time the next 65 pizzas. And I have it set up here and I added that customer's wait time. What I want you guys to do in this activity is I want you to solve for T, right? And find out where that value is. Once you find the T, then you can also go from there and find other things. But I want to pause us and do this in a relative collection. So when we look at this data, I want you guys to solve for it, right? Go ahead and handwrite it first, getting used to the values here, and then input it into Excel. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes and then we'll come back and solve it as a team. So when we solve for t, right? Let me get this here. We have 18.5, 19.5, 4.2, 65. Is that right?
I think it was 18.1.
Yeah.
18.1.
Yes.
My bad. My bad. Thank you. Um, there we go. Now, remember when we were talking about T-Test, right? And we talked about hypothesis testing. And we talked about if values are greater than 95%, then we can, make them scientifically true, right? I mean, like we kind of ballpark it there. We usually say we fail to reject the hypothesis. But in this variable, let me see if I can pull this up in here. When we consider what variables being made, there we go. We just conducted essentially a one-tail test, right? We were seeing if it is within that range, that critical value, or we're going to reject it. Now, if I asked you to draw this out, you essentially would say, I would have my critical values essentially right here. If I found 0.05, I would have a value of 1.96, right? And we would have negative 1.96 over here. That's what the p-value is going to translate over for the z-score. So it just kind of saved us a little bit of time, and I'll kind of show you what I mean. If I'm looking at what the z-value is, I know the probability or the margin of error is going to be 0.05. Last week, I showed you how to inadvertently look this up. And, oh, I messed this up. I wrote this differently. I'm sorry. This turns into 164 and 164 right here. My apologies. I'm so sorry, guys. So as we look at this, right, this is the margin of error. I have my 95% in here that's going to help us. Now, when we look at our variable, are we within that 95%, or where are we with our critical value if this is going to be 0? We would be essentially outside of it. So would we reject it, or would we fail to reject it? What do you guys think? Put it in chat. Will we reject it or fail to reject it? Yeah, definitely reject it because of the fact that it is outside of that window. Now, some key calculations that I think I don't want to skim over, and I want to make sure you guys have, is why did I use 5% here? Well, that was our margin of error. We were only looking at it from one test anyway, right? as we looked at the data here, we have a one-tailed test. We were only looking at it from that left side. So if we see that this variable is lower or higher than 5%, we'll reject it or approve the null hypothesis. So I'm going to kind of have a little bit of help understanding this. The reason we can use that p-value and understand it is because we're doing hypothesis testing. I just showed you how to conduct a one-tail hypothesis test. What's your guess? Hypothesis testing is a critical statistic method for making decisions and drawing conclusions about those parameters. We had that null hypothesis assuming that the data is relevant. And we assumed in the pick up your pizza in 20 minutes or less case that we were firing on all cylinders, our process was. So we had a null hypothesis, which that guy said, hey, come in. I'm trying to say you guys have 19 and a half minutes of wasted value of my time. You guys are almost at 20 minutes and we're saying no. And so our job here is to discredit it. And so we had that alternative hypothesis where we said, we believe that value's lower and we believe that it's inaccurate or it's biased information. So as you look at it, right, if the p-value is lower than essentially 5%, the hoe must go, right? The hoe being the null hypothesis or the alternative hypothesis. What do you guys think?
The alternative
So
hypothesis.
so the hoe is most always going to be that the so well let me show you where when we're looking at this, right? The hoe in the reference is going to be the null hypothesis because of the fact that we're trying to discredit it, right? So if p is lower than 5%, then we know that that value's outside of the parameters. Just like if I showed you guys this value right here, and I said, okay, we have 5%, which has a z-score of this is still lesser quantity than this. We can look at it as a p-value as well if we wanted to, a calculated p-value. By doing norm.s.difference, or yeah. And then this would just be false because it is not cumulative. So if you look at this variable, if p is low, the calculated probability that we had by calculating our t-test is lower than our margin of error, meaning it doesn't cut into essentially that 95% of data. So if it's higher than that 5%, meaning that that 95% would really go down to 94% and it's inside of that margin, we're going to keep the guy. So, what I'm trying to say here, if p is low, home must go. If p is high, keep the guy. If your p-value is lower than 5%, your null hypothesis is going to be rejected right off the bat. If your p-value is higher than that 5%, a margin of error means that there is likelihood there could have been an error that occurred. Now, some things that are negatives with hypothesis testing in my experience, right? Do we know what that process was before we did the metric? Before we went in and measured those 65 pizzas, did we know? No. So when we record studies or we might have recorded the data, we might have created a bias in our process, right? Because if we're monitoring it, that means that people are most likely going to be looking at our processes. Where are we going as a continuous improvement process? And so we use these mathematics and statistical measurements to look at the values and understand what's the likelihood of something occurring. Now, we don't know what the process was before, but we recorded the data, and this is the statistical measure we calculated. Now, this is a one-tailed test again. Now, I want you guys to, you don't have to copy this data over, but I want you to do another example with T-Test, right? So we'll have another example. We'll call it T-Test 1000. Example 2. If you guys want to do, man, I gotta stop saying that's my word. That's my word, my teaching word I gotta go away with. What I want us to do, let's take a 10-minute break. I want you guys to just refresh, go stand up, walk around a bit, come back, and then we will discuss the second example. So that way you guys have a little bit of a break, okay? Come on, guys. You got to mic check yourselves. And he's back. Okay. Y'all crazy. Okay. So I want to discuss another business case with you guys that I think kind of helps us hit home with this, and kind of understanding it from an efficiency standpoint, right? So if we look at these three stores, store A, store B, store C, with store C being at the university, these stores represent our competition, or um these can be our stores in our environment, but we can benchmark it as well as we look at this. So store C being at the university, so somebody comes in, and with it being at the university, somebody makes an assumption that every student eats 100 pizzas a year. Now, we think that that metric is pretty high. So we decide to do a test. Now, we calculate and ask 5 students their variables, right? We asked them how many pizzas do they eat a year, or we took a random sample of those 5 students. One student said he was 69, the other one 79, 89, 99, and 109. This is a random sample of data. We got the standard deviation from that. So I'm just going to create a clip of this. So as we build this, we also have it. So one of the ways I can look at this, folks, is I can say, okay, every student eats 100 pizzas a year. I believe that that's going to be the null hypothesis, that NO. Right? That is our HO. 100 students. Our HA, or alternative hypothesis, is going to be what? Remember, that's going to be the average of the data that I have. So what's the average of that data? Well, we can calculate it real fast in Excel. 69, 79, 89, 99, 109. And you guys can put it in the chat. We get a value of 89. Well, that 89 is all our alternative hypothesis, right? Or we can look at it as X minus mu. I want to know what my sigma values are. I'm just going to copy this over and bring it over. I know my standard deviation is going to be 15.81. What's my N in this scenario? As I'm building this, what's my N represent? Yeah. And it's 5 because that is the number of students we have, or that we took a random sample of. Right. I can copy this formula over here. Oh, I gotta delete that real fast. I'm just calculating, moving these values over. I can show you what they are in here. Uh, so as you look at this variable, right? As I built it, well, let me put in here the formulas for you guys. You can see it there. And then the calculated p-value. Well, what do you guys think? Is it higher than 5%? So would we reject it or fail to reject it? Yeah, you're technically right. We would just use the terminology fail to reject it. Now, you can use T-Test on a variety of different things or um, metrics, right? You could also compare your data, and we'll call this, I think I have this over here. If you guys wouldn't mind clicking on this, it's called delivery times. And so come over here, and I want you to right click on this and say insert. And we'll say a before and then put an after column right next to it, right? I want to show you more of the practical sense of what a t-test is telling us, and I think this will be a perfect example of how. So as I look at this, right, I'm just going to come over here. I'm just going to build a, let's say I want to do, yeah, there we go. I'm just going to build a scatter plot with lines on it, right? It still is the exact same data here. It's just more with a grid point on it. So you can see the before, or we can also call it the current state of the operation. You can just actually just call it current state. That's going to be an easier way to say it. So you have your current state of your operation. This is what we're operating at. Well, I want to look at variables and see if I made a statistical difference, right? Now, remind you, this is delivery times. I'm just going to input some variable data in here and see if there's a difference, right? Now, in our data, there might be some variables that we didn't take account of. Like, number one, we may not even be delivering to the same pizza areas. We're going to exclude that factor. So thinking about these same delivery times as the same people we're delivering to on the follow-up study. Okay. And I'll give you guys this data too. You can also, well, what I'll do is I'll set it up this way. I'll show you guys how to build a performance chart. Now, let's say I want to improve my process by 10%. What's going to be the formula I'm going to utilize to do that? If I said, hey, I want to take it and reduce it by 10%, what's my formula here? Well, we can look at it and just say, okay, let's take our selected value. So say equals, put a parentheses, say 42 times 0.10. Or actually, I want to show, I want to do you one better. I want to show you, so if you guys will just kind of come over here to D2 and put goal improvement and then highlight E. Now, we'll take this value, and if you'll go up just a little bit, I want you to turn that into a percentage. Right? So this square, you can also come down here to E and do it the same way. I just wanted that one variable being this way. I want you to type in negative 10%. We can come over here and set up our formula. After you get done with it, say minus, I think it's 42. That's what it should do. Or you should do minus B3. It should work. Or actually plus, it's plus. Yeah, there we go. So build that into the formula as you're setting it up. It's going to be a good way we can say, okay, we want to reduce our goal is to reduce this by 10%. Then we can establish what that metric would look like. Once you get done with that and you set it up, come back over here to E2 and lock the cell. When you go through and lock that cell, that's going to prevent it from scrolling down this way. But you can do that by hitting F4 or Command F4. You can then just drag this variable down, or you can double click the box. And I'll just highlight this variable for you guys. Give you guys a couple minutes to build that out. And understanding that difference of times too, we're going to be able to visualize it shortly as well. Any questions for you for me as I help you guys build this? All right, you guys should be able to talk now.
And Zach, can you go over that locking it again?
Yeah, so basically what I did, I'll delete it. I came in here and I have my variable, right? All I'm doing is just hitting F4 or holding command in F4, or you could just do what it says and type $2 symbols in between the value and it'll lock it too.
I'm trying to figure out the same thing for a Mac.
Yeah, on a Mac, it should be command and then F4.
Yeah, that's not working for me.
Yeah, I
Man.
just did the dollar signs and it
Yeah.
worked.
Yeah, the dollar signs are probably going to be good, so just type it in. You might have to Google what your computer is too. Like, I don't know, like you might be working on Linux. Like, I don't even know what the command keys are for that. So,
Yeah, I just did the first one and then you can just drag it down.
yeah. It gets, trust me, it gets easier as you work on this more and more and do and build spreadsheets like this. Um, I'm trying to show that like a T-test, this is what you're trying to prove here. I can also come in here and do this too. I think this might help. These are the variables that I got after I did 10%, just for some of you that may be struggling with it a little bit. But essentially, I have my before state, and I have my future state. Well, I'll use the same type of chart that I had.
I figured it out for the Mac. You just hit that down arrow after you selected your variable. Right in your variable, there's a down arrow, and it'll say preserve the column and preserve the row.
So is there a statistical difference in the average? Well, you have to think about what you created. Right, you reduce the downtime or the variation in the process by 10%. But did we reduce the variation between the processes? Well, we might have a lot of variation there, which is expected when you work in a delivery type environment where you're not going to be delivering to the same process to the same customer. But we try to standardize the process, and we can see that we did make a significant improvement. I'm going to just change the color of this. So I'll just have this as that. If I take this data and I do a comparative analysis and I just look at the first data point, obviously I reduced it by 10%, but if I put this map on top of each other, it's going to be very similar, right? We just reduce the variation. So there's not a statistical difference between the average or the spread, right? That's what we're trying to kind of show. And so that's why I show you this as a T-test as part of an improvement aspect, because you can view your future or your current state of your operation. And then you can take that current state and look at your improvement after you do your Kaizen event. And this is going to allow and help you for continuous improvement activities by understanding that T-test is just one piece of the puzzle that you can add. Now, as you look at this, right, I can see these two variables. This is what I'm trying to do with the T-test. In the video that you guys have in the T-test improvement section, it talks about a pre-test and post-test that have a very similar example, right? But I could just do this real fast for you guys. I have my before and after. Now, this is from an operational standpoint, but this is where I can see the goal of my improvement was to reduce everything by 10%. How I did that, that's going to be through a project, continuous improvement efforts, streamlining the process. But what we look at here is we want to know, is there a statistical difference? So we can type in T.Test and highlight array 1, array 2. Now, is this a one-tail or two-tail test? What do you guys think? It's a two-tail test because we're comparing two analysis, right? So a two-tail distribution. Now, are these paired or are they unequal? What do you guys think? Yeah. Hold on.
think they're
Array 1. Array 2. Two-tail. This would be a two sample equal variance homostatic because they're both the same variable. No. No, it would definitely be 1 because it's both paired. So if I look at that, that's like, is that higher than 5% or lower than 5%?
So you look at the number that you have highlighted?
Yeah. So as you see it, right, you build your t-test and you can see if there is a statistical difference, and it's higher than that. So we see if we made a statistical difference. And the reason I'm showing you this, but I showed you these 2 charts first, is so you can visualize where the change, or like, was there a significant enough change? Now I believe that is the right tail, the right type. I'm gonna double check and see what 3 gave us. No, it's not 30. It would just be a paired test. Yeah. This would be such a small number. It would be under that, right? Is that how I would read that? Negative. Yeah. Is that higher than 5% or lower than 5%?
Lower.
Way
No.
lower.
Now, if you look at it, right? So, as I'm saying, is there a statistical difference? No, there's not a statistical difference between these variables. We might have changed and improved our process, but we didn't do anything with the spread of data. We still have the same amount of distance between the variables. And so, that's what t-test kind of proves. I don't know, just kind of a roundabout way of saying use that as a way to show if there was an improvement, but you can do that a lot better with a descriptive graph like this. What are people going to understand better, this data or 2 graphs that show a side-by-side comparison?
You like pictures.
Yes, dude. The reason I tell you guys this is so when you're looking at, I'm gonna move the screen over here so it makes it feel like I'm talking to you guys. I have the screen, the camera over here and the screen over here. But when you're just showing your project and an emphasis on why you need to show change in an organization, or even showcasing the likelihood of what a change could look like, showing a before and after comparison is going to be essential. Now, you don't have to go around and do t-tests to prove that there is a statistical difference, but that's the theory behind it. So I hope and I hope that lesson on t-test was really informative. Um, you can do it by just understanding 2 different arrays. There's some good videos that I've attached that go into that a little bit more, especially if you want to know how to compare 2 data sets if there's, not paired, meaning that they're not related to each other. And then there's other ways to compare data as well. So those videos go a little bit more in depth with this, but making it about awareness between processes, I think that's most important. And a t-test allows us to understand the differences between how many data sets. So let me rephrase that. If I was to ask you how many data sets do we use a t-test typically for? We would typically say less than 30 data points. It helps us compare 2 statistical means, right? And we can also use t-test as a way to do hypothesis testing, where we tested an initial claim, that null hypothesis, with our alternative hypothesis. All right. I want to, like, we're kind of at a weird time right now, and I want to be able to kind of go into this and dive us into our project. So let's take a 10-minute break and we'll start going into our project a little bit, okay? Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope you guys are doing well. I wanted to say hey. As we go through and we talk about looking at organizations and looking at the causes of issues, one thing that I like to do is set it up as a brainstorming activity first. One of the reasons I do this is because this can become that uh fishbone diagram, but oftentimes what I see is sometimes students are getting caught up in categories instead of listing what the issues are, right? Damn, Jay, I didn't know we were going to the gun show, bro. Sorry. Okay. So when we list our issues in the organization, right? I set it up as a activity where I'm listing 1 through 10, right? What I can do from there is grow it into leadership categories or frameworks. And that's where a fishbone diagram truly lies, is coding it. And so you can look at a fishbone diagram from a variety of different ways. And so let me make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Okay. So you have your issues that you've listed, right? Well, an Ishikawa diagram is essentially known as a fishbone diagram, right? From there, I'm not going to draw it like that because that does not look like a fish head. But you have essentially your issue. And then you have the causes of that issue. And so this is essentially what a fishbone diagram is it's a way we can code and classify things, right? So we take essentially our issues that we have, and we can then turn that into our causes and breaking it down, right? In the videos, I talked about root cause analysis and understanding what the root causes of an issue is, right? Do we remember what the categories were that I had that we had listed in the videos?
Are you talking to leadership equipment?
Mm, no. I told you guys that in class or in the breakout room, but I wanted to go into the fishbone diagram first. What were the categories or subtitles of those causes? So if I broke this down and I look at this, manpower, I can also look at this as like the people aspect. The methods, procedures, going through to that. This is where it says in the book machine, but I usually put equipment.
We got methods, materials, measurement, Mother Nature.
What do we have? Mother Nature. So Mother Nature, environment.
Yeah.
We got machines.
Yeah, we've got that up there in equipment.
Okay. Methods, environments, measurements.
Measurements. What else? Was there anything about policy at all?
Mm,
You could bucket, like we talked about people being robbed or safety measures, so I think that would fall under policy.
Yeah. Now, there's really like if you look at various different things, right? It could be materials, it could be measurements, it could be so like you'll have materials here. Sometimes people put policy under Mother Nature because it's technically environments. I'm just kind of like giving you the kind of book answers. However you want to code it, it's perfectly fine. You know, I don't want students getting caught up in, okay, here's the issues. I'll list these as orange so that way you guys can see it as separate things. Now, as you start to list your essential issues, you can start branching it out and coding them into different categories, right? Every one of those issues may fall within one of these categories. So as you start to identify and draw out a fishbone diagram, you can classify it as different ways. I refer to it as coding, right? I'm coding the problem.
CODE coding or COAT coding?
Coding. Like I'm coding a problem. Some like, or you could just better say classification. I can classify the problem better. So when you start looking at your problem in an organization, you can really start to really break it down into these categories, right? If you have leadership issues, okay, that could also go into the manpower aspect, right? Measurement items, and like maybe I can give you a little bit of a glimpse on here to kind of help you. If we look at manpower, right? These is going to be the people, the operational issues. Some common issues we might have are what? Short of staff. What else?
Business not necessarily being short of staff, but like business being so good that it just overwhelmed the staff on hand and
Right.
like doing like different seasons, like sports or whatever.
Capacity issues, right? That could also be another classification under what?
Methods and procedures,
Training?
Boom. Boom. What else?
measurements, yeah.
Dang.
About skill set or like the talent.
Skill set, right? Um, skill set, we'll say technology wise. And then we could also say skill set is what? Maybe soft skill wise.
There was like age restrictions too.
right? So give me just 1 second because I want to do this for all of our issues that are the same. Um, what was that again? I'm sorry.
Age restrictions.
Okay, that could go into the policies or procedures, right? Environment, where could that go? We could cross that over to manpower issues,
Methods.
methods. So again, boom, you start to see essentially another trend, right? Well, one issue could also lead to another issue, right? That age of restrictions could also lead to the shortage of staff as well. So when we look at this from a procedural standpoint, that's going to have multiple, facets of that might be a root cause leading from this issue. So that age restriction also decreases our capacity, and it also decreases our shortage of staff as well. What was the age of restriction on again? I can't remember what exactly it said.
It was like on the bicycle, so there was like a new age restriction law for the bicycle drivers.
Yeah. A lot of industries, they'll see not necessarily like an age restriction, like because everybody in America wants people to work like 18. If you're in alcohol, it's over 21, right? And then certain roles may require an age restriction, but if we look at if you look at this around the board, when we look at our capacity and our workflow of our environment, we need to be able to look at our policies and what that capacity looks like, right? If we're not able to handle our workload, we can analyze this and break this down in multiple facets using a fishbone diagram or a coding or categorizing type methodology. Um, again, let's do another one. What's another issue that we had that you guys we can look at?
I mean, we didn't say that it because we would just focus on like what impacted delivery times.
Mhm.
But I guess thinking about the materials, if they don't have them, then you couldn't have a delivery. So like there was issues about like supplier shortage, like the pizza box, the pepperonis.
Right. Vendor issues.
Yeah.
That's gonna also collaborate from looking at different things. Different things in your mindset you could look at is what's the distance from my vendors? What is their delivery schedule look like, right? How can we adjust it to meet our operational demand? Like, when you talked about value stream mapping, if you saw a buildup in an operation and you started to see that you had a lot of raw materials, you might want to reduce that workload. So, as you can start to see, a lot of this is learning how to classify issues. And across the board, if you start to see multiple issues, it can be an indicator of a focus point. Now, you can classify this as a fishbone diagram, an Ishikawa diagram, a coding activity, or a classification. category. Excuse me. I'm gonna do this as one color, guys. So that way you can see them as the main categories. Again, I think this is a really good activity you can do with your team. And just putting it on a board just like this, getting together in a room, maybe not through laptops or computers, but just putting it up on a whiteboard and saying, hey, what are the issues? And then you start to code it from there. A lot of times, some downfalls that I see professionals do during this activity is, what do we want to do as human beings? We want to fix the problem. So we'll just start to get off topic talking about an issue, right? I try to keep a time window of about 15 to 20 minutes when I do these types of activities. Now, of course, when I'm lecturing, I'm breaking it down just a little bit more. But, I just listed out of these are the issues. This is what we have. And we get it out there in the open. And then we start breaking up the categories and brainstorming it from there. Now, again, sometimes you'll have people wanting to fix issues and then you'll get off topic. Another example that I've seen is you'll see a lack of participation, right? From a leader standpoint, how would you challenge or get this feedback from your audience? I want to know your opinion.
I'll just ask questions and get feedback from different, just make eye contact to that individual when you're asking the question.
That's right.
Surveys, kind of like you just did. You surveyed the information from us in the
Mhm.
forum.
So you remember earlier on in class, I said qualitative data can become quantitative data in a sense, is because I can start to put metrics on every one of these issues, could I not? Even if you said soft skills wise, okay, what are my turnover rates? What's my number of write-ups that fall into that category, right? Still, we could quantify that. We could look at a reduction of our staff or our capacity flow issues. If we get overstaffed, our process gets bottlenecked. It starts to bog down. So, but how do you choose what's your priority here?
I would assume that like the more like you see yellow and red, so the more that it shows up under each category to me would push it. It doesn't necessarily, I don't think means it has to, but to me that would push it to a higher priority.
Right. So maybe color coding it, right? I guess, how do you rank the issues? What would you base that ranking system on?
I feel like the
Let's
ranking should be based off the operation, really, because like we see manpower has a lot of issues, but if the equipment's down, manpower does nothing for us. We can have fully staffed and everyone can be knowledgeable, but if the equipment's down, we can't run the business. So I think what affects the operation as a whole first, and then we dig into what keeps that operation going, you
That's-
know?
Or look into things that we can actually control, right? So if we have issues that we can control, have some input or influence, we can kind of put those in a category and see if we can work those down to kind of better the situation for us.
Now, when you do like operational risk management, this can also come into play too. Um, Looking at different safety mechanisms as well. I've seen when I look at safety in an organization, when I used to do OSHA, I used to do like not necessarily audits, but I would do like an audit reporting. So I would get paid as a consultant to find out like if their industries are in violations, right? Does that make sense? So like I learned a lot about how to classify industry problems and different safety issues using this method as well. So like this doesn't just apply to a fishbone diagram. This coding tool is really useful in real life too. So that's kind of uh, a a different way of looking at a fishbone diagram, but I really think that classifying it and seeing it visually helps you understand it from that perspective. In my head, I always try to aim for issues that have overlapping topic, like they're overlapping sections. From there, I'll want to judge what is the most cost impact. Like if I'm to do nothing with this, I could look at what's the cost of poor quality, right? You remember that? The COPQ? I could scale it from that standpoint. And then if I wanted to judge what the impact of it is, this is where I would say DPMO, or if I don't do anything a million times, I could show that qualitative aspect and then turn it into a quantitative measurement to understand why we need to have change in our process. Any questions about this activity?
What's the TMO again?
It stands for defective parts per million opportunity. Or I'm sorry. Defects per million opportunity. I always say parts because when I work with manufacturers, they're making things. So I would predominantly say parts there. So defects per million opportunities. And understanding how that builds off of the cost of poor quality. Now, remember, a lot of our role as leaders as we're building this, and you have to remember your audience. As you're explaining capacity issues, visualizing it is going to help your audience understand it better. That's why, as you guys see it, I'm helping you build it here. So as you start building it out there, you can become accustomed with what you want to use, right? There's a variety of different programs out there that have this capacity to build this, right? I can use Canva, I can use Lucid Charts, I can use even, there's a lot of even AI software that can do this for me in a fraction of a second, right? With today's technology. Think about coming into an industry with that capacity and ability to take and account this as a leader perspective, and then bringing that out into qualitative and quantitative, or well, bringing this issue and putting it into a quantifiable metric and then showcasing that on a graph. You're going to have that visual impact to the audience. So just remember in the activity, classify it or label your issues, then code them. This is a 20-minute activity. It's not designed to do the improvement. It's only designed to do the talk about the problem. Finding the analytics to this is like an after step, or if you're able to retain it fast, like, yeah, but I don't want to spend that 20 minutes asking somebody, hey, what's the issue here? Like, we want to find that in a later on meeting, right? Okay. So in tonight's session, we discussed several different things. We talked about the delivery times. We discussed essentially how the T-test is utilized there. During the one-tail test, we learned about the T-test and how to input that into Excel. The T-test, again, is used to identify two data sets means, right? And we're trying to judge, is there a statistical difference in the data? The first example we had was with the pizza guy, and he said we were pushing the limit, so we judged our 65 pizzas to have this T score, and we calculated it and compared it against what we already know as regards to the margin of error and what that would produce z-score wise. And so we can use that data to determine, is that guy right, or was he a little off? And we said that he was out of the ballpark and he wasn't close because of the fact that it was less than 5%. Same thing here with the pizzas. We went through and discussed T-test and how to average that data set and include that into our calculation. Instead of having it given to us, we would calculate the average. We then turned that into a T-test. And we could determine that that was higher than 5%. So we would probably at that point maybe want to grab a little bit more sample sizes, bigger sample sizes. But overall, you understood the purpose of T-test. From there, I went into describing fishbone diagram and how to utilize that to take a qualitative approach and turn it into a quantitative aspect by putting graphs. I then discussed about talking with your audience and how graphs can be important to them. Overall, tonight's session was filled with a lot of information. What I will do is take this recording tonight and put it into the class for those of you in the live session, those of you that are going to be watching it afterwards. I would encourage you guys to go back over this the weekend. We will start your projects on Tuesday. And then it has been asked to maybe conclude Thursday, Thursday of next class. I will do my best to do it, but I need to see where our projects are. So expect a lot of back and forth activities with your groups Monday or Tuesday. And just a reminder, we are going to meet Tuesday and then we will meet Thursday. There won't be any change to that schedule. So we will meet again using the same Zoom link. If there is any issue or there's any communication, just go directly to the portal. We're happy to take care of it. Our people will be out of office Monday, I think. Yeah, I think that's going to be the day that we're going to do now. So, yeah, if you guys have any issues, just shoot us a message. But for those of you watching, go through, take notes, redo this in Excel, and maybe pause the video and go back and forth with it.